Welcome, everybody, to Theory Underground. What you're about to hear is a conversation with Daniel Garner of OG Rose that took place on September 18th. The September M-Stew was over a month ago at this point, but we're finally releasing this episode as a standalone for podcast and YouTube. In it, we talk about sociology, imminent critique, and the conditions of possibility for broad-based, large-scale structural change, as we like to say here at Theory Underground. The sociology course that he is referencing throughout this is the one that I am teaching IRL at a university as an adjunct. It's one that is available to my subscribers, and my subscribers also get deeper dives into stuff that comes up. So it's a very intro-level sociology course, but it bridges into critical social theory in a variety of ways through critique of political economy and critical media theory and everything related to the post-class fractured mass and really getting the pulse of our current situation so that we can figure out what is to be done. All right, and with that, we're going to roll it. So yeah, if you want to get special access to the course, become a subscriber. And with that, I hope that you will enjoy this episode. Welcome back, everybody, to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher, and for those who've been here for the day, we've had a steady, 40 people all day. Yeah, it's actually amazing. So great job, everybody. But for the people joining this in the future on podcasts and as the standalone episode that will go up, welcome to all of you as well, because we always keep in mind the future audience more than the present audience, though that doesn't mean we think less of the present audience because there's a lot of overlap between those two things. Now, with all of that said, we are joined now by Daniel Garner of OG Rose. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing wonderful, Dave. All is well. We lost electricity, but got it back, so that was good. And we actually have successfully grown beans like this in the garden. I know, right? It's actually quite, Michelle cooks them amazingly. I was wondering, should I wear it over my shoulder like a towel or something? I was thinking that. But we will see. I mean, the other thing is I have duct tape. And I thought, maybe just in honor of sociology, because they all have mustaches and beards. Do you think we could do something like that? Yeah, I feel like I'm in the club now to
There
talk
we
about
go.
sociology,
No, yeah,
So
yeah.
is
You
it good?
officially
Yeah,
you're in the club now. This
I'm in
is
the club. Oh, gosh, I was worried. Yeah,
we're ready to
I tell you
go.
what, I was so worried. But the class is great. I love what you were talking about with imminent critique as being a really wonderful starting part to kind of think about sociology. It was really nice.
Yeah, so for people who are just tuning in who have no idea what Daniel is on about, well, I am teaching Sociology 101 at the local state university. It's my first full class I've ever taught where I put together the syllabus and get to just lecture the whole time and work with my students. And when I say first, of course, I did have classes in the past at the local state university, but they were like, oh, let's all sit around and talk about things with your partner. And I was more of a facilitator. And I did, so in a lot of ways, the Theory Underground and the ongoing research seminars and the courses that I do here kind of was to scratch an itch. No, I want to do real lectures because I want to challenge myself. But now I'm used to doing stuff with obsessionals who just care about this stuff. And it's nice going back to basics from that level to okay, I've got a room full of people who are studying business and nursing and psychology, and they've never really thought about sociology. They don't know their Marx from their Durkheim or much less their Weber. And so that's what I've been teaching. And of course, people who are subscribers at Theory Underground, like Daniel and Michelle, as well as a lot of you in the chat, get access to those 101 lectures that I'm doing, as well as deep dives with Dave this coming Sunday. I'll be doing one on Marx, Durkheim, Weber, the main three sort of fathers of sociology. And the conversation I want to have with you today, Daniel, is about, first of all, your sort of reflections on Soc 101 as I'm teaching it so far. And then I want to get into the distinction between a paranoid view of sociology and the sociology of trade-offs, and how it is that you can care about capital and the situation with capital while still having this trade-offs approach, because a lot of people I think that would take the trade-offs approach would not take capital seriously. And I think maybe I'm right in assuming that part of the way that you're able to do that is through imminent critique. What do you think about that?
No, it's magnificent. I very much appreciate how you were starting and really emphasizing the imminent critique in Marx as what is necessary for sociology. So sociology is very interesting because, obviously there's been thinkers of society for a very long time, but as a field, it really starts with the Industrial Revolution. 18, I think some people place Comte as the first one to use the term sociology, but it really starts in the 19th century. And there are questions of why. There are also new emotional experiences that are becoming prevalent. For example, Patricia Sachs has an interesting book on the literary history of boredom. Boredom doesn't really exist as a characteristic of daily life until you get into after the Industrial Revolution. Now, of course, there were times where people had leisure or they didn't have anything to do, but he starts talking about this deep existential experience of what do I do now? And so boredom is interesting. You obviously have alienation. You have all of these different things. And so something's happening there that is very important to take seriously. The reason why, also, I should note that I think imminent critique is the proper way. It's a methodology that matches the movement of thought that we see in Hegel. Mikey, in that wonderful discussion from the last stream with Todd, was talking about how let's just start with sense certainty and see how in its fullness, it eventually realizes a certain limitation, a certain hit, and it has to move on to the next failure. The imminent critique aligns social thinking with the logic of Hegel that you see, because it's the same sort of thing. Wait a minute, if we're just in sense certainty, because obviously like Holgate and different people will emphasize the dialectic is not merely between things, but in things. A entails otherness in of itself, right? So with the birth of sociology, what you have is a logic, especially if you center it on the imminent critique, that is suggesting that there is something you are in, right? And that's what sense certainty encounters. Wait a minute, I'm in something beyond myself that I then have to move into otherness, or I can't even identify myself, right? So sociology is a epistemology that aligns with what Hegel's talking about. And you can certainly say the imminent critique in that sense of dialectic goes together. The reason why this is extremely important is because basically, if we're not going to make the mistakes, Studebaker has emphasized quite rightly the need to be patient, the need not to try to throw like he was talking about Don Quixote. I thought that was wonderful, where you don't realize you're in a different world and you're trying to engage in revolutionary or emancipatory politics that don't work because the way is shut, as he puts it. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, then probably what we really need to think is actually logics like the imminent critique, or the logics of things that we are in, that we have to participate in a way that contributes to their own negation sublation that can unfold. The key topic, I think, that sociology, because another thing about sociology is, and Jim Rutt was saying this, I thought it was a good point. A lot of people will say modernity is birthed by the printing press. Obviously it's a big deal. And he was talking with Leon Anderson about this. But one of the key characteristics of modernity, as you've been stressing in the class, is the division of labor, estranged labor, where people go from being a blacksmith making an entire, wheel or something to just making a part of it. The reason why this, I do think, is a key shift that makes people think sociology is because suddenly you are participating in something that's whole beyond you. So you're like, wait a minute, there are social logics in operation that I cannot see the completeness of, that I am always already in. And this becomes the birth also of, obviously, as Zizek will say, the fetish. And one of the big mistakes that I actually think has removed our possibility of dwelling in a faithful presence for new conditions of possibility is because we talk about things, and Shahil was making this point brilliantly. We talk about things like money as a fiction. We talk about the society as an illusion, and there's just the individual. Well, sociology is actually the field of study that there are things like money that are, in a sense, a fiction, but have real causal impact on your life. This is very odd. This is what begins to emerge. Now, obviously, in religions and theologies, there's always been forms of it. But this participation in something that has causal impact on your life that you're participating in, but can't see the whole of it, but know you're in it, well, then suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I'm in something, and now I can critique it, and it pushes outward, right? So the division of labor creates a sense of, some people call it an egregore, I believe is a term, this kind of fetish that is beyond. And then you have a sociological logic that's coming along and saying, yes, there are things you are in that you can't fully see, and yet they have causal impact on you. And it's foolish to say they don't exist. That's
Right.
what you see people like Harari, and then I'll give it to you. You know, different people saying money is a fiction, it doesn't exist, it's not real, it's an illusion. The nation state, these things are illusions. The sociologist comes along and says, don't call it that, because it creates the impression that the way that you are going to make a difference is to emphasize the real, which happens to be the individual, which is atomized. Well, guess what? The individual is not actually able to deal with the capital nation state if we use that language. And so sociology, I do think, is the field. If you take seriously things like the fetish, you take seriously the immanent critique, you take seriously this notion that our lives are now defined things that are here and not here at the same time, and we have a sense of something that's causally impacting us that is not at hand. You take this all seriously. If you want to talk about new emancipatory politics or new economic systems, you got to figure out how to better coordinate that reality and participate in it. So I think sociology is central for thinking new possibilities today. So I appreciate the class you're doing. I really do think locating it, kind of centering it on this question of immanent critique is wise.
Right. And so for me, what that means is that you can't think Marx and his impact by just thinking about the politics that
Correct.
proceeds from his work, which is important. You do have to think that, but you're missing something substantial if you don't think, okay, but why did he impact politics the way that he did? There were lots of people writing about the working class. There were lots of people writing about capitalism. There were lots of people doing that kind of work. What was it that stood out from him beyond that fantastic beard? And I think the basic answer is the basic answer from that I kicked off the entire course with these students is you don't have to know a whole lot about him just yet. I just want you to understand that at the time there were, and now we're being very simplistic, these three competing schools of thought that were sort of national in character. There was this sort of working class socialist or anarchist French approach, and then there was, and that's like, you know, with Bakunin and Proudhon, et cetera. And then you have the British approach, political economy, Adam Smith, Ricardo. And then on the other side, you have German idealism, you know, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel. And of course, I always tell these students, don't worry about the names. It's not on the test. It's just a bunch of big names. The fact was, you might not have to worry about those names because you might not be studying this for the rest of your life. All you need to know is Marx studied them hardcore. And the reason he studied them is because they were what was the most important at the time. They were all getting at something, but all of them were missing something. And he doesn't just synthesize them. He thinks about he thinks about these things resolutely from their own standpoints, right? And then he does an immanent critique. And what does that mean? Well, he thinks them all inside out. Thinks them inside out is the best way to say it, you know, as opposed to immanent and transcendent and blah, 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 you know. And I think you can get that. The best way of kind of saying that is you walk a mile in the shoes of the thinker. Okay, well then let's put on David Ricardo's shoes and take a walk. Okay, let's go hiking in those hills with Adam Smith. Okay, now let's go hiking on some crazy psychedelic journey with Hegel for a few months, and then come back to earth and touch grass with the likes of I don't know, Kant or John Stuart Mill, right? Yeah, exactly. And so that's what he did. And then of course it's when he did it, and it's the most important sort of obvious, well, I'll say it this way. It's in terms of times when it becomes obvious that the social has its own sort of power, emergent property over and above the individual, it's then. And all three of those different schools of thought are getting at that in their own ways, right? And yeah, the division of labor's kind of where I jumped off this week, getting into Durkheim and talking about the importance of for Durkheim, Marx was not scientific enough. Marx and Engels had too many dogmatic presuppositions. But Durkheim's going to go, okay, now I'll hand it back to you after this one. But basically the best example that comes to mind with him as far as the social taking on its own property over and above individuals. And I love how you talked about how once you strip that away and act like you're just being a realist, all you have left is individuals. Absolutely. And of course, that's itself fetishization, right? Which is not a point that I've gotten into, and I'd like to hear you say a little bit more about the thinker that you were referencing there, because I didn't even catch that name. But the point is that with his work on suicide, which came a few years after his work, The Division of Labor, these are his two most major works, Emil Durkheim is going to say, and he was saying this in The Division of Labor as well, he was already on about this thing, because he basically goes, okay, it seems like morality is falling apart for everyone everywhere. Why is that? Right? But he goes, well, how would we measure that? He goes, well, it's so subjective, morality. It's hard to really get to the bottom of it. So different people think that this is more moral than that. You have all these different competing accounts for a positive morality. So let's take the extreme opposite case and use that as our measuring stick. He goes, suicide is the extreme opposite case of almost anybody's idea of what morality is across cultures. And where do we see it? We see it in all of these urban industrial centers. He says, everyone keeps saying that we have more wealth and happiness than we've ever had before. If that's true, why do we have higher rates of suicide? And why are those higher rates of suicide in the most intellectually advanced cities and regions, specifically the Protestant ones? Why are Protestant people offing themselves at a higher rate than Catholic people? And then he just case after case after case, statistics after statistics, and he's like, guys, there's only one serious difference that holds between Catholics and Protestants across all these different regions. And of course, in some cases, it's entire countries, right? Spain is Catholic, right? As opposed to Germany, which is Protestant. Well, Spain does not have anything remotely close to the suicide rate in Germany at the time. Why are these people so miserable? Well, it's because of the free inquiry and individualism promoted by Protestantism that at bottom, yes, it might be religious, but its fundamental belief is challenging authority, not allowing the social to do your thinking for you. It's an approach that puts the big other into question, and Catholicism is not. Yeah, and so that is an emergent property that has this sort of social effect on individuals, and then individuals think when they kill themselves. And by the way, the stream is going to get hidden from the algorithm just because I said killing and suicide and all this. But that's because YouTube doesn't allow you to have adult conversations. The advertisers don't like that kind of thing. No. But no, the emergent property and the effect of the social on the individual, he talks about as a current. Now, what am I getting at? I'm getting at the fact that he's pointing out that, yes, suicide might seem like the most radically individual act you could possibly do. Everybody who takes their own life has their own reasons, their own subjective understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. And he's saying, yes, and that matters. But outside of their individual interpretation of why they're doing it, there are social factors. And you can't say that there's not, because these rates, the rates of suicide have held true over time. So that the rates holding true over time in these areas as opposed to those areas means that when you do this radically individual act, you're a statistic. You're actually playing out a statistical regularity and thinking of it from your own standpoint when you write that letter. If you do write a letter when you jump off that bridge, oh no, I'm doing some radical individual act. I have my own reasons. And he goes, you might have your own reasons, but you are in a social current. It's like in a river when there's a current of water that's stronger than some more peaceful area of the river. The Catholics are in a peaceful area of the river, and the Protestants are in this crazy part of the river where some of them get more successful for sure, but a lot of them are offing themselves at higher rates. So yeah, that's what I was teaching about this yesterday, and then tomorrow I'll be getting into Weber.
No, all that was magnificent. And the thinker may have been Harari, who wrote books like Homo Deus and Homo Sapiens, who really always emphasizes the non-existence of things like money or the illusion of fairy tales and stories. The issue is that, unfortunately, that is the thinking that contributes to atomization, that then for him ultimately will lead to a logic of a transhumanism and different things like that. Now, again, the word transhumanism means many things to many people. There are positive versions of it, but that general sort of Landian structure of thought, because if there's only the individual and the individual in of themselves, the ultimate liberation of the individual is, say, controlling genetics or or merging with technology, because then you are purely choice, right? You can really be anything you want to be. And what else? And there really is a sense today, because I don't think we can think sociology, that the problem is that we're just not free enough. If we could edit our genes, if we had enough technology to go to Mars, if we just had more options, then we would be happier. But that is a fallacy that many, many sociologists warn. It doesn't work that way. And Žižek obviously emphasizes that freedom is a bit of a disease without a cure, is it not? Because the more choices you get, the more that the anxiety arises on what you should choose. And if you have no social support at all, that very choice can be a flame that burns you alive. And so giving people more options may simply lead to further anxiety that further disables them to participate in new forms of emancipation in the name of ultimate emancipation. In the name of ultimate emancipation, to give ourselves choice all the way down, we may lock ourselves inside of hell. And the door might be unlocked if we could only restore these new ways of doing things, but we never try to open it because we think we're free and there's nothing outside. It's a bit sad. But the key with the sociologists, too, on the points with Durkheim, so things like suicide that Durkheim is talking about. Also, too, I was having a conversation with Lorenzo on about ways to rehabilitate and help people through conspiracies. And the algorithm went through and like took everything down and attacked me. Literally, the whole thing was about actually the reality of dealing with these things. But right there is an example where we don't know how to discern or how to deal with large things of information. And we also don't have the training socially to be able to handle making choices. Which is ironic because we've gained more individual choice, but actually we struggle more to discern and make choices about things. So we actually would rather offload it to an algorithm that will lead to unintentional consequences. But anyway, what you mentioned with Durkheim, the disablement of Ivan Illich, the boredom of Sachs, the alienation of Marx, on and on and on. There are these new phenomena, these new social realities that are emerging with, we could say, generally the 18th century. You could say it, where you could, with the Dutch Empire, LLCs, we can talk contracts, fractional banking, whatever. Something is emerging that I will just, for simplicity's sake, talk about the fetish in the Žižekian sense, because I think there are these things that are arising that are real and not real at the same time. It would be silly to call them illusions that have a causal impact on you. And in response to that, and finding yourself caught up in this thing, the response has typically been increase of individual freedom. If we increase individual freedom, that's the way to address it. Now, there are many goods that come from individual freedom. Also, if you don't have individual freedom, don't you have things like racism and xenophobia and all these different problems, right? Don't you have these kind of restraints of the society on the person? So also, ethics tends to seemingly aid the movement toward the individual, right? Because it seems unethical to maintain the society that provided people social capital because it tended to do so at the expense of other people, right? The reason I bring this up is because it will bring us into, I think, the importance of this topic of the difference between this kind of conspiratorial sociology, if you will, and this trade-off sociology. So sociology emerges, if we say, this awareness of norms, fetish, power. Many sociologists have different ways to put it. And there's a realization that, wow, this can oppress people, and we need to do something about it. The problem is, if you're only in the business of removing the things that oppress people, it turns out that those very systems also provided people with social capital, social networking, social belonging that actually kept them from, say, falling into these various things like boredom and alienation and suicide, right? And what that has done is led to an issue where now we find ourselves lacking certain powers by which to do anything. But then the way to restore a power to the individual seems to restore the conditions that caused oppression in the past, right? And that seems to be the real tension right now with this idea of this kind of split you'll see in progressive circles in America between an emphasis on race and racism and these sort of forms of oppression, and then other people saying, well, actually, we need to bring back the working class. We need to think class. There's always this sense of, well, don't you run the risk of restoring previous conditions of xenophobia, et cetera, so forth, right? This is the problem that actually, if we cannot address, we basically have little chance of dealing with the capital nation state. And we also have to think about trade-offs here. But let me explain. There's a very interesting book. So we have the Philosophy of Right conference coming up at Philosophy Portal, and I'm very interested in power dynamics and Hegel and what is power. Yeah, there you go. And I'm also thinking through the Theory Underground conference coming up with all of the Illich and all of that will be fun. But there's a very interesting thinker. His name was Bertrand de Jouvenel. He wrote a book called On Power, and he asked the following question. How is it that the state, as he sparks in kind of a general sense, how is it the state has become more powerful than ever before under modernity, and yet individuals think that they're more free? He says this really doesn't make sense. And one of the case studies he makes for the state being so strong, which of course I'm using that as a general term, it can mean many things to different people, is the possibility of total war. He asks, how did the world wars happen? That required a certain ability to mobilize people, to bring resources together, that defines a kind of totalized power that is, you don't see in history. Now, he goes through his case studies similar to some scholars on Hume on the existence of total war and totalization requiring abstract valuation. But what Jouvenel wants to point out, to put this very simply, is the reason that individuals think that they actually, and he's writing like, I don't know, the 50s, 60s, maybe a little before, he's asking the question, how is it that individuals think they're more free while they are under this increasingly powerful state? And the way he says it is because people have been freed from, say, the church or family commitment or the community. And so they're like, well, I'm free, right? So they are not noticing as the state or as the market and these things come together into the capital nation state. I do like that phrase from Koratani. But you don't notice because you're being freed from, you could say, the society. If we make a distinction between state, society, and individual, what's happening is an erosion of the society that then increases freedom of the individual that makes you not notice that you're actually under greater power of the capital nation state. And then one day, basically now, you're waking up and going, oh my gosh, the way is shut, as Benjamin says. Oh my gosh, we have no time, energy. What do we do now? Well, what Jouvenel wants to point out is that power for everyday people is actually found in that middle space, the society, right? You have to bring back the commons, the communal, the learning webs, all of these things. Here's the problem. That was the space that generated Jim Crow. That was the space that created hierarchies and social. That was the space of religious intolerance and oppression and different things, right? And as a result, the state, for good reason, the society, the people, for good reason, opposed that middle space. But in deconstructing that middle state, with the middle state, which the state supported, the capital nation state greatly benefited, and individuals didn't notice because they felt more power in gaining individual autonomy. But it turns out that individual autonomy actually becomes a disease without a cure that overwhelms you if there are certain capacities that you do not gain to be able to handle it. Well, those capacities came from the society and the commons and the space in the middle, right? We have to regain that space. And if we don't think about that space, which then is also going to bring in the calculus of various trade-offs to make that space possible, then you cannot talk about new conditions of possibility. You know, Studebaker was talking about the monastery, right? You could associate the question of the monastery as some kind of bringing back of that space.
Yo, what's up, listener or viewer?
Yo.
How you doing?
So I noticed you sitting there watching this video.
Yep.
And yeah, you're listening, you're paying attention. You're definitely not hearing everything we're saying, though.
Yep. Nope, definitely not. You're not taking notes.
Yeah, take notes, dude. What are you doing?
Hey, you know what? If you want to be passive and just enjoy this content while multitasking, that's what we do as well. Everyone does that most of the time. We very rarely switch into this more active mode, and that's fine. That's fine because you're kind of absorbing this content as you go through your life, and that's great. But if you're going to do that, then we just have a little request of you. What's our little request, Nance?
We want you to do the algorithm things. We want you to hit the button, the thumbs up, or the thumbs down. Hit the subscribe button. You could even hit the bell so you get notified when there's an epic marathon stream.
Yep.
Or one of the dope ass interviews. We just finished a dope ass interview. But do the things to help train your algorithm to actually give you content that you prefer. And at least here we are aware of the problem. We are aware that we're all infected with the algorithm, and we're trying to do something about it. So while you can like maintain a cynical distance of like not being an enthusiastic vocal supporter,
right,
doing those actions actually, first of all, it helps the channel, it helps Theory Underground, but it helps your algorithm too. You will get less kind of shitty clickbait React content if you train your algorithm to give you what you prefer. I mean, you're already here. You're already watching this.
Yeah.
So
enthusiastic, unironic, genuine support might be a little too much for some of you who are way too cool for that kind of thing. But you can at least hit the little like button, and then we'll say we're even, okay?
There we go. You owe us nothing now.
Yeah, let's get back to it.
What I do think is very interesting, I will just note, and then I'll give it back to you. I definitely think that what some people, like what is happening here with Zoom, YouTube, you could say the liminal web, there are different terms. This is a social coordination mechanism that has not existed in history, that has needed to go with the pricing mechanism of a Hayek or a von Mises for the coordination of resources. Without a social coordination mechanism, there has not been the possibility to grassroots create a new commons that does not fall into the previous means of creating oppression and norms and things like that. But this allows people to coordinate around the world around values that they share, that is going to habituate them to different meta judgments, that is going to allow the possibility of a society to form as distinct from the state and the individual, that creates new possibilities of power for emancipatory possibilities that was not possible. And so this social mechanism here, this, I'll think of it as kind of a social coordination mechanism, which, please note, for most of history was reserved for the elites and institutions. If you went to the college, you got to meet the right people, you got to network, you got to get all of those different things, right? It is critical to note, following Randall Collins, I think the great Terence, he was talking about Latour, right? And I think he talks about action networks or different things. Now, Latour, I'm not going to claim any expertise on him. I'd like to with Belonging Again 3. But there's an emphasis on the network, Randall Collins and different things. Social capital, you can also talk about network effects. Network effects has a technical meaning in like more computer science thinking. But if we grant it in the sense that we're describing here, there's a way in for most of history, the power of network effects were controlled and not democratized, you could say. Now it is possible to spread and democratize network effects, which is precisely the generation of the returning of that power that Juvenal says that we have lost, that makes possible new conditions of possibility that wasn't there before. Now, the problem is right now, the institutions, like the colleges, or the government, whatever, they still have the money, basically, and they still have the social status and different things. The advantage is that this social coordination mechanism is more effective. It's a better way to interact people without the same inefficiencies. It also overcomes, I'm happy to elaborate it on something I call the introduction problem that tends to hinder the generation of network effects and social capital. But in being more effective, there is possibilities now for the creation of new social efforts that have been lost, that we didn't notice were lost because we were distracted by a feeling of an autonomous freedom that we were gaining, that turns out without social support simply to lead to a loss of time, energy, burnout society of a Han, disablement, shadow work, and all these other pathologies that you're not even allowed to mention, because if you mention, you get associated with wanting to bring back the society that oppressed minorities. And so you're not allowed to talk of these things because otherwise you're part of the bad guys. And so then there's a silencing of the discussion that benefits the capital nation state. So I think these spaces of discussing that is really important.
So what did you think about Walter Ben Michael's point about being for the state, saying that there is no way to develop a universal basic goods sort of program or set of policies, much less institutions, without the state?
Well, I didn't hear Walter speak, I'm afraid, because of the energy.
Okay.
But on that point, Basically, for most of history, I would say that's generally fairly true. And I definitely think laws and state, these things matter. It would be, I don't think it's correct to be anti-state. One of the reasons is you could look at like a call Planier to talk about, well, the only way not to have a state is you don't have standing armies, you don't have trade agreements. There's a whole lot of things you have to get into with a state. That's why state and capital for Call Planier and the Great Transformation come together. Now, we can get into the difference between Iona and Athens and how there may be ways to have a minimum state by not having a standing army or different things. But that's a different subject. All that aside, for most of history, you did not have a social coordination system like this that would make possible the bringing together of people to form a society. So the only option seems to be the state, right? Because they have all the power and they have all the economy. And yes, they still do. And there's a question of how can the social coordination mechanism that's currently going on, theory underground, can it economically survive long enough to actually participate in what Dr. James Hunter in his book To Change the World, because he does this analysis on what actually changes the world, what changes the paradigms, what changes the society. Well, it's people that have a faithful presence, that have some ability to connect with power, influence, and society without compromising their values in the process, right? Well, if all of those mechanisms of interaction have been captured in a Deleuzian sense, well, that's not going to work anymore. But we actually do have a kind of possibility of a faithful present, a dwelling on a different alternative horizon here that is forming online, that I do think open possibilities of rebirthing the social between the state, the social, and the individual that makes the state not the only way to go. Now, funny enough, I do think if you bring back the social, then that has a influence on the state because there's a power there. They see a society forming, but it becomes here's the key. Bringing back the social can allow you to influence the state revolutionarily, in a sense, without opposing the state revolutionary. Like, what's the difference between like a straight up like revolt, tear it down, burn it down kind of thing, or a kind of how do we get in there and infiltrate? Like infiltrate, opposing in a strong sense, and then kind of influence, right? Those things are different cultural strategies. And then there goes into questions like Benjamin Studebaker in his book, talking about the way is shut. Those all being the case, it would seem like the proper strategy now is an emphasis on the creation of the possibility of social capital and the democratization of network effects. And that, yes, it does ultimately have to have an influence on the state, but that seems to be an effective means by which to do things that is now possible today. So those would be some thoughts I would say.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. So, funny little aside, actually, Nance is currently trying to catch up. And so he said that he is listening to you double speed, which is nearly impossible. And the judge of that said in the chat, he normally listens to you at 0.75 speed. I'd like to see you have a conversation with Destiny or Ben Shapiro, because they're both speed talkers too. And they had a debate this year, and I listened to it, and I was listening to it sped up, and that was really fun. So now I want to shift gears here really quick. You are planning to present at TuCon. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your proposal. What are you working on for TuCon?
That is a great question. I'm looking forward to it. So some of the possibilities are bringing in the situation of capital, Ivan Illich on the convivial life, looking through the first Theory Underground anthology and looking for various thematic things to bring in conversation with those two. And then also talking about your book on Timenergy as a review. So those are some of the different possibilities. I am increasingly, I do certainly like Ivan Illich a lot. I believe one of the earlier speakers was saying, well, Ian was in the conversation with Michelle, that you see something like the learning web is occurring here, like the restoring of that. I definitely think, as on the difference between, like Will was on that wonderful distinction in the class between the convivial technology and the manipulative technology. I don't know if we actually can have convivial technology or tools without the social, because otherwise, like everyone else is pressuring everyone else to use the technology according to certain habits and habituses and ways that leads to it being manipulative, right? So for example, if I say to you, hey, Dave, I'm not going to text you, except one time a day. if you're not the kind of person who agrees that that is not a hit on friendship or relationship or rude, if you don't agree on that, there's going to be a hit, to the relationship, to the interaction that is a result of having a different relationship to the dynamics of the technology, right? So I think there is something to be said about having to have social spaces that have an agreed meta judgment, as we were talking about in the Goggins conversation, that agrees on what is the proper relationship to the technology that is not simply abandoning it entirely. Because if we can't do that, then the technology will probably unleash dynamics that lead to various problems. And dynamics, as a term that I like to use talking about Illich, as we did at the Parallax course, also aligns with the fetish of Marx. Like technology is not merely the device in your hand, but the causal impacts and expectations you put on yourself while holding it. So there's a fetish structure, right? There is a kind of causal impact. So I might talk, I am interested. This is the part where I admit that I have a lot of actually there's a stack of this are all the philosophy, portal, and theory underground stuff right over here. And
Paraphernalia.
I'm thinking, yeah, there you go. On the overlap of the history or how there is this, like, what is this fetish? What is this dynamic that is in operation that if we cannot think, we cannot restore the social. And if you cannot restore the social, then you probably are not able to restore power that is going to able to actually lead to different possibilities. So those are things I'm talking about or thinking about. I definitely think, well, Illich has a lovely line too in the Tools of Conviviality, where he kind of asks this question. He's like, there are many people who are, say, in prison, right? Who have food and shelter and everything taken care of, and yet they are in prison, right? Why is that? Sometimes they have better conditions than us. Well, it's because they have no say over how they live their life. They have no autonomy at all. Well, wait a minute, Illich, haven't we kind of been emphasizing where individual autonomy can actually lead to the breakdown, like it gets taken over by the market? Well, he's saying the only way to be an individual is to actually have some sort of control over the dynamics or the fetishes that run your life without you realizing it, because otherwise you're in a kind of prison and don't know it, right? Well, how do you become artful in fetishes and dynamics that are here and not here at the same time? It fundamentally seems to be a kind of philosophical consciousness that is required. And then the last thing I'll say, I am very taken too by what Studebaker was saying about the theoristic virtues as kind of being higher virtues, the ability to create divine experiences for one another, which requires philosophy to be able to do. I do not think that if we don't learn the art of how to work with dynamics, it will be possible for us to create these theoristic experiences for one another that seems critical to open up to different ways of organizing ourselves in our lives that is alternative to the logic of capital, that is organizing, say, according to an abstract social use. So those things go together strongly, and Illich is pointing at it. I think Marx is pointing at it. I think the sociologists are pointing at it. And so the question becomes, how can these social coordination mechanisms be used for those theoristic virtues? But that's going to require an awareness of dynamics and the art of how to use them. Because let me put it this way, for most of history, and then I'll give it to you, for most of history, the formation of fetishes have been basically monopolized by the institution, by the elites, by the society, right? If indeed this is a new social coordination mechanism, it may be possible to give to the people the power to create their own fetishes and things that organize their activity that is not reducible to the individual, but extend their humanity versus replace it, as a line I like to kind of think about with Illich. Illich wants us to ask, how can we extend our humanity with technology versus be replaced by our tools, right? Well, how can our fetishes, how can our egregore, all these different things, how can our collective logics extend our humanity versus replace our humanity? Well, that requires a new coordination system. That requires a new capacity to coordinate socially. And I do think that technology is here. I do think this technology is actually not merely an extension of the internet. It is different in kind. As the book and the internet are different in kind, this kind of technology is different in kind, because it allows a social coordination mechanism that was not possible before, without which the price mechanism ends up alienating humanity and leading to unintentional consequences.
This kind being what? Not
Zoom,
the internet, but
YouTube, the Zoom, like this digital public space interaction, what we're doing.
What we're doing with TuCon. So you'll
yes.
So for the Theorizing the Underground room, because there'll be a room dedicated to that topic, you could go in there and talk about that. Basically, is kind of what.
Yeah, because so for example, you're able to have the the all day live streams, the IMS2, which then allows people to meet, and I can watch. So for example, I call it the introduction problem. There's always been a problem in history of how do you get people to know one another well enough that they're able to just come into a room and automatically go straight to the network without, say, 2 weeks of introducing, getting to know one of people's works, right? Like, so for example, I was able to listen to Mikey. I've mentioned all these different people. There's a way in which I have a sense of how they think before having met them. And that's the power now of overcoming the introduction problem that allows you to then come into a live event or come onto a stream like that, bam, the social formation is very, very quick. Also, for most of history, you had to had a professor teaching, say, the same course forever, because even if he was introduced to the last class, he has to redo it, right? We have a more effective means of dealing with introduction problems. Oh, and then critically, it's not merely enough for me to say have an understanding of Studebaker, Cadell, you, Mike, et cetera, so forth. I need 20 other people in the room to have a general sense of everyone else. Well, again, how was that possible in the past, except each one of those individuals, one by one, repetitively redoing the lecture, especially if you weren't able to coordinate everyone together at once, right? Well, now with this technology, you can overcome the introduction problem that allows going straight to the social network effects that is also emerging from a dialectic between the online and the lived, right? That's what, this becomes kind of, there's that book on the Silk Road, and I know we're coming into the end. I don't know where the time flies, but there's that kind of idea that you have the digital functioning as a kind of roads, a social Silk Roads, not merely an economic roads, that then allows people to travel to places feeling like they already have a sense of who those individuals are, which then is where you can go to the network effects quite quickly, right? And so that combination, I think, is very, very new. And I would also note, I don't think that this kind of thing like we're doing right now is simply podcast content creating. I think it is certainly creating content, but the content is for the sake of the networking, not the sake of the clicks. You're creating the content so people can watch and have a sense of what a Studebaker or Mikey thinks, so that then you can do the networking effect. The content is for the sake of overcoming the introduction problem, not simply for the sake of creating some sort of attentionalist monopoly, right? That's not to say content is bad. That's not to say views or likes are bad. But if they're not in service of an effective social coordination mechanism, they simply become cloud capital, maybe, as Vassar's in techno-feudalism talks about, right? So what you're doing is creating ways to send signals through the noise of people that are working to form new societies between the state and the individual that allows the habituation of new motivations, new meta judgments, new values that then when those people come together can create network effects that were not possible in the past. So I think it is a new form. I think it is certainly a new kind of information technology.
I love it, man. And this is a perfect opportunity for me to give a little teaser for something that's coming up, a conversation with Nance and Anne at 11 Eastern after Ben Burgess, who's next. But in these closing, 10 minutes here before you go off into the digital green room with Nance, once he's finally caught up with you, presumably, I just wanted to show you really quick, as far as the medium goes, and this being something new, it's not just the internet as we've come to understand it. We're doing something with the digital commons. Obviously it's problematic to call it the digital commons because it's YouTube, it's Google, it's Amazon servers. It's not owned by us. It's not commons at all. We can't even talk about certain words like suicide without getting shadow banned by the advertisers. There's all kinds of issues with having real big kid conversations on here. It's not really possible in some sense, but also we don't stop at what Zoom gives us. We don't stop at what YouTube gives us. We're integrating a bunch of different functions. And at this point, Theory Underground is independent of most of those functions. If we were to lose our servers and our channels and everything tomorrow, I have the addresses of most of the participants. The ones who are making monthly payments to me, the ones who've bought books, I have all of their addresses. We could revert to snail mail, and we could continue to do stuff with just printing zines, sending out catalogs, doing conference calls over phones, doing IRL meetups. So right now, as far as like a backup, we have a backup. We are actually internet branded, monopolized internet platform proof. We are, even though we're using them right now, we're actually in some sense free of them, in the same way that I might be teaching at the university right now, but I'm actually free of it in the sense that I am independent thanks to my monthly subscribers. But really quick, I just wanted to say also, so we have this thing called the main stage at TuCon. Nobody else in the world has ever done this as far as we are aware. And so you see up here, it says TuCon 24, October 24th through 27th. And I know you're going to be trying to keep up, but super busy with a wedding the whole time and then presenting mostly on Sunday. But I just wanted to show, so we have the main stage, and we're doing this at an actual venue that, you know, it's a venue really close to where I live. Basically there's a real life stage where bands play. And then there's 4 studios, recording studios and jam session practice session spaces that can be reserved by bands. We're going to have all 4 of those reserved, as well as the main stage, the entire time. Now, I'm about to get technical, and I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible for the viewer who doesn't really understand all the technical terms and everything like that. I just want to be really simple. For the history of conferences, it has been true that if it's done in such a way so that it's economical with people's time and energy, then there are breakout rooms. And the point with the breakout rooms is that you as a participant have to choose which breakout room to go to. And then the rest of the time you're at the conference, there are sessions that you missed. Someone might tell you about it, but you don't have the possibility of going over what that person said and then talking to them while you're there. Now, you could, after the fact, maybe find their paper, or you could, you know, maybe if there was a recording that gets uploaded after the fact, then you can look into it. Okay, well, we're getting rid of all of that. This will be the first conference that I am aware of where there are breakout sessions and simultaneity is something that's occurring. So we'll have the theorizing, the underground room, we'll have the critical media theory room, we'll have the Marx, post-Marx, PMC, value form room, we'll have over here human futures and time energy. And so there's all of these rooms, and Benjamin Studebaker, for instance, is doing 3 presentations, okay? Well, he will go to one of the concrete, actual physical rooms, and he'll present. And this will all be on Thursday. He'll go present here, then he'll go present here, then he'll go present here, okay? Oh, but what about the ones that he missed? Don't worry. In every one of these rooms is a laptop with a Zoom breakout room, and somebody like Nance or Will or Kier or Cesar, who's trained in recording with OBS, that person will MC, record the sessions, upload the sessions. I will then, on the following day, the following 2 days, with Nance on the main stage, play that on stream live, but also in the room for people who are in Boise who are attending. So everyone who wasn't there on Thursday night still gets to see the presentation. If Studebaker, for instance, he does 3 presentations, he's moving from room to room. There's all these other people presenting at the same time as him. As long as he sits in front of the main stage for the next 2 days, when we go over these recordings, Nance and I reacting to them for the first time, and then bringing on the MC who was present, who collected the questions for that person, and bringing on that person, and then doing the Q&A with them then. Meaning that every person at this conference who presents at the same time as one another still gets to see everyone's presentations for the next 2 days, and gets to participate in the Q&A, meaning that people get to sleep on the presentations. So in some cases, people get to see a presentation, sleep on it, come back the next day, submit their questions to the MC, and then we're going to go over that on stream. And it's all going to be like an epic marathon live stream. It's just going to be 4 days long. It's going to be fucking amazing.
Well, it does sound amazing. Oh, that's a wonderful design. Well, as I would just comment on that idea of having a backup, having everything kind of there, also having live events. You speak about the importance of being a capital realist. I think there's also something you could say about a digital realist or a cloud realist, right? Like, this is the social coordination technology. You have to be a realist about this. Yes, Amazon, YouTube, these things provide the structure. But creating the infrastructure to create this coordinating mechanism is not realistic. But there are, in the same way that as a capital realist, you can think about ways to use capital in a way to undermine an autonomous logic of capital that dehumanizes. What are the ways to be a cloud realist, if just in part, the techno-feudalist, or a digital realist, by which to actually use the technology against its manipulative logic to make it convivial, right? That's, I think, cloud realism per se. And that's what we need to think. And it's not going to suffice to simply go, oh, well, it's on Google or whatever, so it's evil. Well, then you're cutting yourself off from the coordination for the possibility of creating.
Wait, hello?
Studebaker to function.
Oh, you cut out for a second.
Oh, did I? Alas,
yeah.
Am I back? You want me to sing?
You're back,
Yeah,
you're back.
Good. It says that as a cloud realist or a digital realist, if you don't take that position, you cut yourself off from a coordination that could help, a mechanism that could help return the middle, the social, the monastery, in a sense, that Studebaker says, which seems completely necessary for being able to think the possibility of theoristic virtues, creating these kind of divine experiences, these kind of like events that suggest possibilities about how human beings can live, that is not reducible to an abstract logic that dehumanizes, but in fact suggests the possibility of living convivially, to get stuck on that word, in a way that extends humanity, not to replace it. So I think being a digital realist about that and seeing potential in that coordination and things like the Theory Underground event is very, very important. Otherwise, we are stuck just oscillating forever between the individual and the state, just like Juvenal warned. And in so doing, the way will be shut. And the only alternative is to further atomize, at which point you'll simply try to extend the choices of the atomized individual and go in the direction of wanting to edit your genes in a transhumanism that results in the replacement of humanity, not our extension. So I think the work is important.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for visiting the channel. We're looking forward to seeing you at TuCon.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure, Dave. I enjoyed it.
Take care.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of a situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, tier 4 is amazing because it gives you tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people, Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, patrons. Okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons, thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys, just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You did so good. Thanks, guys.